You are tuned in to the CCM LegacyCAST. My name is Chris Gaines, and today's guest is Steve Archer. Steve has been producing incredible music with his amazing family, the Archers, for going on 50 years now, and is showing no signs of slowing down. I had the pleasure to get to know him and his wonderful family back in the late 80s and 90s. But today you're going to get a chance to see from his perspective all that he has seen and done in contemporary Christian music. And today's show begins in 5, 4. Hey, Scott, what's going on, man?
Not much, Chris. How are you today?
Man, it's good to have you. Steve Archer's with us today. I've been waiting for this.
Yes.
And you are going to get to know an amazing dude. I know I've got a chance to introduce you to some great people, but there's probably not a better dude on the planet as far as just a good person. He and his family are amazing. The guy's been doing this forever, and he is ageless. He's like the Dick Clark of Christian music, but can sing a whole lot better. Trust me. And
well, I know there's a few Grammys and some awards like that are behind his name as well. So
all that kind of stuff.
Well
all
recognized.
That kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff. Hey, real quick, let me ask you. We're now into December here when we're recording this, and I want to ask, how do you handle Christmas with your family? We were just thinking. I was talking to Steve off camera. He's got a humongous family, and they all get together. How does that work? Do you guys are y'all Christmas Eve people? Are y'all Christmas Day? How does that work in your family?
We're Christmas Day people. Now, you have to understand, my family is very small. We have just a very tight-knit family, and we're looking forward to spending time with at least one of my daughters. My other daughter has to stay in New York this year, but when we get together, it's always a lot of fun. It's a lot of stockings and gifts, and my wife does breakfast on Christmas morning, and everybody comes down with their Christmas stockings. She buys all of the kids. I mean, I've got 30-year-old kids and in-laws now, and they're coming down in Christmas jammies that my wife's bought for them. So everything's matching. Everything's just so, it's quite the production. Christmas is not easy on me. So
I hear you. Well, I'm sure knowing your wife, Julie, she has it all worked out.
She
pulls it off without a problem. Well, listen, I'm going to bring Steve to the stage today. I'm just super excited to have him with us. Steve Archer, welcome to our podcast, man.
Thank you, Chris and Scott. I'm honored to be with you guys, and I like that opening that you have. That's very cool. I like that word legacy.
Kind of wild. Well, we're looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that.
We think legacy is an important thing for us to consider at this point in our lives, Steve. So
yes,
you know, it's at some point you got to be thinking about that. So we'll be getting into that real deep at some point in the show today.
Well, absolutely. Our theme for our show has been to look back, to lean in, and leave behind, and those each play key roles. We definitely want to spend some time setting the Wayback Machine. We've got some fun pictures we're probably going to look at. Now, our audience is very interested to hear about how you got started and what was contemporary Christian music look like in the very, very beginnings. And so you have such a unique perspective to have seen it go through so many things. We talk a little bit about just in life on the spectrum of where we were. I mean, we went from albums, cassettes, all the way to CDs, and then digital Napster and Apple Music. And so we saw so many things. Everything changed. I mean, we had to go to bookstores to buy music, and that's a whole confusing thing. I mean, Christian radio. I mean, you've seen and done it all. And so it's going to be fun looking back, but we're going to want to spend some time really leaning in to figure out what has God brought you through? What have you learned along the journey so that now, as you've got not only kids, but grandkids, what is it that Steve wants to be known for? So with that, Scott, I want to turn it over to you just a little bit, and let's get things rolling. Okay.
Great. Steve, I read a little bit about your biography, but do you mind going back and telling us what was it like growing up? What kind of things did you enjoy? Tell us a little about little Stevie. Okay. what was little Stevie like?
Little Stevie is the fourth boy to come along in the Archers family, with my dad and my mom, Lee and Peggy. And when the first two boys came along, Gary and Ron, they were just good people that had moved from Oklahoma right after they got married, moved out to California, and had their first two boys, and were just living life, farmers and hardworking people. And my dad and my mom moving out from Oklahoma inspired a lot of their family to follow them and move out to California as well. So all of us ended up out there. And then they had two more boys. But before that happened, my mom and dad finally gave in to a persistent neighbor and went to church with him. And my dad heard some good preaching, and he hungry heart, my mom as well. And they had given their hearts to the Lord.
Wow.
And along with that, my dad had just, I think in that moment, had felt God calling him, not just to salvation, not just for his family, but for others. And God put a real burden in his heart for people. And my dad was the kind of person that he never met a stranger.
Mm.
And when I was born in the little town of Mojave, California,
Yeah.
he was already a minister at that point. And my brother Tim was just 3 years before me. And you can tell when my parents got saved because my first two brothers are named Gary Lee after my dad and Ronald Anthony. And then conversion happens, and along comes Timothy James and Stephen Mark.
We're going to switch to biblical names from here on out, right?
Yeah, they definitely got influenced by that. And then I always tease them that they backslid when it came to my sister because her name is Janice Renee. But we
Okay.
love our Janice because she was such a blessing and a surprise to our family. And we were happy four boys when our little sister came along. But yeah, so we were a family in California growing up in church
Okay.
and under our dad's ministry, under his preaching.
Okay.
And so, of course, that my dad got involved in a denomination and then at some point became a representative, a presbyter for that denomination for Southern California. And we spent a lot of time in Northern California too, because when I was very little, we moved to Northern California, and that's where my sister was born in Northern California. So
Okay.
she's the only Northerner in our family. But so we grew up in church, we grew up around Christian concerts, revivals, and a lot of ministry. And my brother and I, inspired by our older brother Gary, who was singing in quartets out of college and in college and out of college. And he was in the Golden State Quartet, he was in the Waymakers. And so we grew closer to music and we wanted to sing. And none of us knew if we could sing or not. We just knew we liked to sing.
Okay.
And our dad, because Tim and I liked to sing, we would walk around the house singing, and then we would end up being the Righteous Brothers and start harmonizing. And our dad heard that, and he and mom would sing a special once in a while in church, but they were not musicians, they were not professional singers. So our dad encouraged us to sing in a service on a Sunday morning, and lo and behold, it was very well received. And I
Okay.
can't remember the song that we sang, but we just got up and did a duet. And because people responded so positively, it encouraged us. It's one thing to have your parents encouraging, it's another thing to have the congregation go, you guys have got to do that. And go, that was wonderful. Love that.
Wow.
So that encouragement led us all the way to getting involved in some competitions.
Okay.
And we ended up at the nationals for all 50 states and won a trophy and came
Don't-
home just so
jump,
elated.
don't jump past that because that would be. I'm curious about that. What did it take to prepare for a national singing competition? That had to
Well,
be quite the. I mean, that had to be quite a stretch for you guys.
well, it was interesting because it was called Teen Talent Search is what it was called
Okay.
in our denomination. It was the Assemblies of God. And so the competition was pretty good because we had to start in our section of California.
Okay.
Then we had to go to the district. And then if you won the district, then you got to go to the regionals. And then if you won the regionals, you got to go to the nationals. So we
Wow.
made it through that process. Although I must say, for the regionals, we lucked out because our competition was not able to make it. So we breezed through that one.
Okay.
But I will tell you the song that we sang for our competition has a little bit of history and a nice connection for us. And it was a
Yes.
Bill Gaither song
Okay.
called Lovest Thou Me. And so that was the song that we sang as a duet. And I was 13 or 14, Tim 16, 17. And we would just get up. We knew the song. We had a pianist that helped us do that. And we would just belt it out. We loved to sing. We weren't shy. So we just belted the vocals out. And I think that's part of what maybe impressed people was we didn't holler, but we did sing.
What you might have lacked in talent, you made up for in confidence, huh? Is
Yes,
that
yes.
it? Okay.
There was definitely some volume there.
Okay.
And a great song. It's a beautiful song. And when we met Bill Gaither later on in our career and told him about that, he goes, "Oh my goodness." He goes, "That's one of the first 5 or 6 songs that I ever wrote." It was early on.
Wow.
But it did well for us because we took second place in the nation. Our competition was pretty sharp. It was more of a quintet, a lot of cool harmonies, and they were singing a Ralph Carmichael song.
Okay.
So, but it was just a wonderful experience. It was very encouraging to us. And at that same time, we were feeling the same thing that our father felt about ministering and preaching and pastoring, that the Lord had given us these gifts, that we had come to understand that. And it's like, wow, we love doing this. People enjoy it. There's a message going out of this, and people are being touched by it. So that was very encouraging.
So at an early age, you felt like you had a call for ministry and service. There wasn't a lot of wandering or anything at that point, Steve. It was your ticket was punched to the Christian artist life, basically. Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Within 3 years, from 2.5 or 3 years from that, after singing with our older brother Gary for a while, we would go and sing with him at he was an evangelist at the time before he became a pastor, evangelist out of college. And he was singing with his wife, Sharon, and they had actually done a custom recording. Again, another thing was like, ooh, wouldn't that be exciting to make a record? But within a few years, we had put our little band together called the Archer Brothers out of our church in Palmdale, California, and did some singing with Gary. But then we began to get some of our own concerts. And through our brother Gary, who had been at a Teen Challenge concert, he met a man by the name of Andre Crouch.
Okay.
And that's where things definitely took an upturn for us, in the sense that we were fledgling. We were trying to learn to write songs because we were just doing a lot of singing cover songs. And we did have a young man that was saved in our church that became a part of our band, Billy Masters, who started doing really well as a songwriter.
Okay.
And so it was great to have Billy. But yeah, I would say from that teen talent contest, within 3 years or 2.5 years, we were in the studio with Andre Crouch.
Wow.
Who we had met, and he had heard us sing, and he was drawn toward us. And he said, "Hey, why don't we go down here have you got 2 songs?" And we said,
you need to have more than one, right?
He said, "Let's go down here. I know this guy's down at Whitney Studios, and we'll go down there with Sandra and Perry and Billy, and let's record a couple of songs." And so we did a 45 single produced by Andre Crouch with our first song that was ever played on the radio, a song called "Put on Jesus, Let Your Light Shine, Walking in the Spirit That'll Carry You Home." But having Andre step in and take us under his wing and encourage us to do a full album, and which we wanted him to produce as well, but he was traveling and so busy he couldn't do it, but he connected us with some wonderful people.
Well, let me ask this, Steve. I'm going to pull you back just a little bit. We want to talk about the music career, but there's 2 things that have come up that I'm curious about. One is it would seem to me that your dad had a big impact for all of the children to be on that path of ministry, that your parents had to have a big impact in your life. Do you mind talking a little bit about what was it that they might have done to have that impact, and what that looked like, and maybe what you learned from your parents in all of this?
Yeah, my parents were salt of the earth kind of people from Oklahoma, and good families. My mom comes from a big family, my dad from a pretty big family, but my father had been through some brokenness because his family got split up, and but he channeled that into really hard work. So he's a very hardworking man growing up, had left school to support his family. And we're talking back in the 30s.
Hard times. Hard
Yes,
times for
hard
people.
times
Yes.
out in
Yep.
Oklahoma. And then he saw my mom, and can't blame him. Beautiful, wonderful, sweet lady. And they fell in love and got married. And so they were good people. They were hardworking people. Dad had been out to California to visit some relatives, so he really wanted to move out there. And my mom took a leap of faith. And after they got married, she said, "Okay, where you go, I go." So, but when they found the Lord, and you can see it in my two older brothers who they were growing up in a good home, but they weren't growing up in a Christian home. And my
Yes.
parents weren't going to church. They weren't, but thankful for that neighbor that kept
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, you got to come to church." And my dad already had a business in the little town that he lived in,
Mm-hmm.
and a town called Salida, California.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact was so strong on him. And I think it's because his hunger, his appetite was so huge.
Mm-hmm.
I think was so strong that he got a good, full filling of salvation and an anointing on his life and a calling.
Yeah.
And that, and my mom being just one of those wonderful ladies who was supporting a great wife, a great mother, wonderful friends. You would never hear anyone say anything negative about Neoma Archer.
Right.
Her nickname was Peggy.
Okay.
Just so I think that that kind of strength, that kind of influence, that kind of love will carry you through a lot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so have them there supporting us and keeping us grounded and helping us deal with some of the things that we were going to be facing as we became more popular and making records and bigger and better things happening, coming back home and coming back to grounding and coming back to humility, and that this is about the message of this music and this is about it touching people's lives. And they let us, just to give you an example, in our little small church in Palmdale, back in, I would say 1970, because I was a sophomore in high school, junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
We were forming our band, and then by our senior year, but our dad let us have youth nights in the church, and we had electric guitar and drums on the stage in church when we had our youth night, and we would jam out for Jesus. And when our parents, even though they might be a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things that we started doing, because we were doing Jesus music, we weren't doing, like our brother, we weren't doing quartet music, we weren't doing church music. We were trying to write our own songs. We were even changing the lyrics of popular rock and pop songs and
Okay.
doing those, changing them to Christian lyrics.
Yes.
But the young people were loving it, and our youth group grew exponentially. And when our parents saw, hey, this method is a little different than what we're used to, but look what's happening to these kids.
Yeah.
And they're even drawing their parents to church. So it was a real time of kind of revival in the early days of Jesus music. And a lot of that was happening in Southern California. You see it over there with Calvary Chapel
Yes.
and Jesus Revolution movie. We were right alongside that at the same time. So that grounding, though, that passion to share the gospel from our parents and loving people.
What was your path to Jesus, Steve? What was that like for you?
It was very strongly influenced, of course, because
Sure. Yes.
your father's a pastor, you know.
You were born with a Christian default switch,
Yeah.
right? It was just like
There's a lot of pressure to get saved, you know.
Yeah.
When you're 5 years old in church and they're having the altar call and the Spirit is moving. And I think I was about five and a half, or
Very
somewhere
young
between
then.
5 and 6 when I told my mom I wanted to ask Jesus in my heart. He prayed with me, and went down to the altar, and it was a very emotional thing.
Sure.
But going into my early high school years, we had moved from Northern California back to Southern California. And my dad was pastoring down there. And you're going through those 12, 13, 14 years of age. And your faith gets challenged. You get into public schools and you see what kids are doing and you see how people are living their lives. You go to visit friends and you're inviting them to come to church. And oh
Yes.
no, our church is cool. Oh no, we have youth night. Oh no, we had drums and guitar on Sunday. And so yeah, it was it was a time of having to make a decision. I got involved in the choir at school, but then also the ensemble group.
Okay.
I got to go about and sing a little bit. And but at the same time in my sophomore and junior year, that would be 16, 17, 18 years of age, is when we were starting our band. And I think it came to a point in my senior year that I realized that I really had to make some strong choices about if I'm going to be getting up here and I'm going to be singing about Jesus and my friends see how I live my life, it needs to match up.
Yes.
And the Lord brought me through a lot. He kept me. There were kids involved in partying and drinking. There were kids that were getting involved in lesser drugs and those kinds of things. And where we lived in the upper desert, Palmdale, California, it was a corridor for in the early 70s
Sure.
for a lot of drug activity. And God kept me. And I'm so thankful that He did. And I think that in itself, although I was more of a shy person, so I wasn't very evangelistic in high school, but people knew that I was a preacher's kid. And that can be good and bad
Sure.
because some of the hardcore people make fun of you. And then the others just stand back and watch you and are curious. And eventually, like, yeah, I think I will come to your church and check it out. Oh, maybe I will come check out your band. So we had a youth group that grew by 300% in like a year and a half.
Wow.
And I think there was as many kids in the church as there were adults.
Wow.
And it was a wonderful impact on my life going forward into music ministry.
Well, and maybe getting back to finishing out that story with you've just recorded or you've just been introduced to Andre Crouch and
Yeah.
you see what's going on. You mind telling us a little bit about what happens next? What happens in the story after that?
Well, after we met Andre, it was right around that time that we went to sing at a Nazarene church, a rather large Nazarene church. I can't remember what city it was, but it was in Southern California. And the pastor's daughter was already knew our group, and I think probably even encouraged her dad to have us a little more conservative people. But oh, I love that picture. I'm sorry. When I see Andre, oh, God bless him. What a precious man.
Yeah.
And Evie, of course. But what was I saying? Oh, so we go, she encouraged her to, no, you'll love this group. They don't just rock for Jesus. We had some ballads, we had some slower songs. Well, his daughter, the pastor's daughter, was Pat Boone's secretary.
Oh.
So you talk about another connection happening here. Well, she had invited the Boone family to come to the concert that we did at their church that night.
Nice.
And we met them, and a fellowship and a friendship began for a good 2 or 3 years. In fact, Pat Boone, Andre was the first person to go into the studio with us. But the first studio that we really ever walked into was when we first met the Boone family. And it's reminding me that the timeline is we actually met them before we met Andre, because Pat told us, he said, listen, I have a studio down on Sunset Boulevard. Anytime you guys want to go down there, and if you got something you want to record or you want to rehearse or practice, whatever, he said. And he was very busy. I mean, you can imagine Pat Boone, and in the 70s was still very busy. He's a music and movie icon anyway.
Yeah.
And still going, man. God bless him. Yeah. But what a wonderful family. Their relationship with the Lord was real. It was true. And Pat and Shirley loved having us around, and Christian boys around their girls. The girls at that time were 14, 15, 16, and 17. So Pat just took us under his wing. And that was very encouraging to us because at the same time, Hollywood came along with some pretty big offers.
Tell us about that. What happened there?
Well, of course, we had jobs. We had our little band. My brother was out of high school. I think I was in my senior year. And my brother was working at a city next door in a men's clothing store. And it was called the Mail, was it the Mail Room or something like that? MALE. And it was an independent clothing store, not a chain. So he was working there part time. And unbeknownst to him, this lady comes in with this tall, good looking guy, beautiful lady comes in. And there's a lot of resorts out in the desert. Mm-hmm. So at any time, plus a lot of the area that we lived in, a lot of movies and TV shows were filmed out there. You had Vasquez Rocks, where a lot of the Westerns were filmed. But then you had Lancaster and Palmdale and, of course, Los Angeles and all of that. So there was always stuff like that going on. So this lady starts talking to my brother, tall, blonde-headed kid. I think he was in college I don't think he had started college or he had done a year and was out of college. But anyway, he's working at this store. And she walks in and starts talking to him. And I think she was thinking along the lines of checking out his personality and talking to him about acting, right? Sort of like scouting.
Right.
Well, it just so happens that this lady is a famous movie star. And he doesn't know it.
Wow.
And she says, well, what do you do? And he goes, well, I'm a singer. My brother and I have a band, and our dad's a minister. He's a pastor of the church in the town next door. She really didn't back off. She didn't really go, oh, okay, well, we're out of here. She goes, oh, you're a singer. She said, can I? And she was very bold and forward, as a lot of Hollywood people can be. And she said, let me hear you sing. And he goes, well, I'm working right now. She goes, well, when do you have a break? And he goes, well, she said, what do you do? What do you play? Do you play piano or guitar? He says, I play guitar. He says, in fact, my guitar's in my car. And she goes, really? So she says, well, if you don't mind, I'd like to stick around when you're on break. Could you sing a song for me? Well, that started something. He sang a song for her within a month or so. She was at our church, no, not at service time, but came to our church with a record producer and some other guy, and our band performed for her. Then she invited us to her house up at the top of Beverly Hills to perform for a party, and we're singing Christian music.
Yes.
We're not singing pop songs.
Wow.
And her name is Terry Moore. And wow. Terry Moore was a famous child star. The party that we sang at, Glenn Ford was there, Diane Cannon was there. And what's interesting now, just as a side note, Terry Moore is a believer, a very strong believer and a spirit-filled person. And if you were to find her on social media, you would hear her and her friends talking about Jesus. And I think Diane Cannon as well. But here we are, we're singing song, put on Jesus, let your light shine, walking in the spirit that'll carry you home. And here's Glenn Ford sitting over there in a chair out by the pool, listening to us. And it was another world for us. We didn't even know where we were. She was a sweet lady.
Wow.
And I don't think, and we took Andre with us to the party. We took our oldest brother, Gary, and our dad. We needed a protective team with
some wingmen helping you out, didn't you?
Yes. We didn't know what was going on. And Diane Cannon even got up and sang a song with us. She loves to sing. She loves music. And it was just one of those things where God had a hand on us because lo and behold, they had some contracts ready for us to sign. And she had already talked to us about it before we came to the party. She said, we're going to have another band there. We're making a movie. We want a young band to be in this movie. And it's a star-crossed love thing, but there's going to be some music in it. And so she invited this producer, a guy by the name of Mike Post. And Mike Post was used by the Lord that day. Excuse me, whether he knows it or not. And Mike Post is a famous TV theme song writer, probably the most famous TV theme song writer, and a lot of that happened later on. But Mike literally took us to the side of that party and said, "Guys, can I talk to you?" And he knew some of the people there, but he didn't know everybody. He was just invited as a potential producer of the music for the film and to check out this band. And he says, "Hey, I like you guys." He said, "Of course, I'm looking at what they're looking at. They're looking at looks, they're looking at sound, they're looking at, they want a young band." And he said, "The other band was okay, but he said, they're going to be drawn to you guys." And he says, "But is that all you sing is like Christian music?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're preachers' kids. We have a Christian band. We sing Jesus music and we sing to youth and in schools and churches and stuff like that." He goes, "Man, I don't know." He goes, "I don't know if they're going to go for that. You might want to think about, I mean, you can do inspirational songs, but the Jesus stuff, I don't know if they're going to go for that." He said, "Do you really believe what you're singing?" And he said, "How do you feel about dropping that?" He says, because I can tell you right now, I would encourage you to do what you do." And we're like, and he said, you know what he did say? He said, "Don't say this to them. Don't tell them I told you this." Because if they really want somebody, it might upset them that he said.
Right.
But I think he saw some things, or he knew some things that we didn't know, and he wasn't maybe sure he was going to be involved or whatever. But the Lord really used him to say, "Hey, why don't you guys do what you do?"
Yeah.
Because you love it, you're inspired by it. And he was that kind of a person. I think he was working with Mike Curb at the time. And so that kind of encouraged us. And you know what? I was too young to be in the meeting because you had to be 18 years of age to sign a contract or anything like that. And Tim did stayed with me. So we weren't even in the meeting. It's just Gary and Andre and my dad came out and they chuckled and they said, "Yeah, they want you to sign for 7 years with an option for 7 more." It's like when they were offering, and people were walking by us, and I remember one guy walked by us and he said, "You're going to have a house like this." And this house was like up in Beverly Hills, like looking out over, with a pool right by the edge of the cliff. Just, we're right there, you know. And we left that place. And the next time we ever saw Terry Moore, because we were just like, we're going to go do what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
And stay true to that. And the next time I saw her, our band was playing at a music club down on Sunset Boulevard. And
Wow.
she saw our name on the marquee and came in to say hi to us and give us a hug. And she was going on with her life and we were going on with ours. But she was already starting to be influenced by the gospel.
Wow.
And I'm thankful if in any way we had a part in that, but I'm also thankful that God looked out for us because I am so thankful. I see people that are famous in Hollywood and famous singers. And of course, we hung out with Pat Boone. We know what that's like.
Yeah.
We went to concerts with him. We were there when he taped TV shows and things like that. But even Pat was staying true to his Christian from the time that, he made his profession of faith. He stayed true to that. And that really had an influence on us. Andre had an influence on us. So most importantly, our parents.
Sure. So you're hanging out in the LA scene. That can't have been easy at the time to maintain integrity to your Christian commitments. What was that like? I mean, it had to be a challenge.
It can be, but I think because we got right into the studio, we were able to do our first full LP, our full record, because we had 2 songs on the 45. So we put 8 more songs. God blessed us with some great musicians, an engineer who had worked on our very first record album. The engineer that worked with us had just finished a record with Johnny Mathis. So we had, and some of that is Andre's influence and the connections that he had at the time. I'll never forget that, walking into that big studio, I think TG&Y or something like that. Then we ended up at United Western Studios right there on Sunset Boulevard, peeking through the window and watching Neil Diamond, recording, and just some amazing things. But as we got into that flow of making our first record and that record coming out and people, beginning to call us and a booking, our brother Gary had started doing some booking for some friends and with a friend of his, Bill Murray, and he started representing us and helping us getting connected to more churches in Southern California and Northern California. We became known all up and down California. So we didn't have a lot of idle time.
Yeah.
We were either out singing for Jesus or we were home and we were in church and we were in our youth group. And I will tell you one quick rabbit trail here. We did some concerts in our town in Palmdale, California called Youth Quakes because of the whole play.
Yeah, sure.
You know who one of the first artists we brought into Palmdale for one of our concerts, because we wanted to do our concerts, but we couldn't afford to have guest artists. And we finally talked our dad into helping us. And we brought Larry Norman in to Palmdale, California.
Wow.
For our Youth Quake.
How fun. Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah.
That had to have been a blast.
That was a trip for us because we knew his records. We knew,
Sure.
Anything that was contemporary. Our influences were Andre Crouch, the contemporary Imperials, and Larry Norman. And there wasn't much out there when it comes to like Jesus music or that type of music.
But did he bring a different audience? Did he bring a different audience that was normally coming to your concerts? Was it a different crowd?
He definitely brought more people. So what it would be is, it was ecumenical. There were people from all different kinds of churches in the area. He brought a lot more people than we would get on our own little local band. But, and probably some people maybe that didn't know the Lord, but heard his music.
So if someone's seen
an impact on the whole music scene, not just the Christian music scene.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to get an idea of where we are on the timeline. So if someone has just finished the Jesus Revolution movie and you've got what's happening at Christ Chapel and Pirates Cove and all that kind of stuff, Love Song, is this parallel or a little later than that? Give me an idea of what time.
No, it's parallel. This is 1970, 1971. And then I think right around 71 was our 45 single and 72 was our very first record. And that has a cover of the four of us, Tim and I and Nancy and Billy, and standing on the beach in Laguna Beach. It's like definitely a California group shot. But yeah, those are probably, in fact, we did a Calvary Chapel thing on the beach with Pat Boone and Annie Herring. That was really a cool thing that we were a part of. And then of course we attended, we would go to Calvary Chapel services, and then we ended up. So we knew Love Song in those days, not just of them, we knew them. And our very first Jesus Festival was Explo 72 in Dallas. And that's where we got to connect with Danny Lee and the Children of Truth. And Danny Lee later on would end up writing 3 songs that we did on our second album. And of course, we're getting picked up from our hotel to go to our event at Explo 72, which was not the main event. The main event was Andre Crouch, Larry Norman, Danny Lee and the Children of Truth. But we were doing an event with Jamie Owens Collins. And with this guy who was, after they picked us up, we went to pick up a guy by the name of Barry McGuire, who got into the van with us and drove. And so we got to ride in the van with him to the event. And of course, Barry McGuire was on the main stage as well. Wow. And that's when we first met him. And boy, did he have an impact on us. Yeah. Wow. What a guy. What a personality.
Well, I've been having fun, Scott. Real quick, before we go much further down the path, I've been obviously having some fun looking at some of these pictures, and I hope I'm getting close. I know I'm all over the place on these things, but I'd like to take just a minute and maybe pull out a few. Some of these I just have got to bring up, and if Steve, you see one that you're like, hey, I want to tell a story behind that picture or whatnot. But some of these are just classic. First of all, I mean, come on, is this incredible? Or what was happening here? You're out on a farm or something. You got the love bug back there in the bus. What is this going on here?
That's your Jesus Music Festival.
See?
And I can't remember whose bus that is. That's not our bus. Our bus was more of like the Continental Trailways, the Silver Eagle thing. I'm trying to think of who's that. Who knows whose bus that is?
Right. Now, how old are you here?
Oh, probably early 20s. Because we were doing we did Expo 72, Key 73 was at the Los Angeles Coliseum. And then they started those big festivals out in Mercer, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Jesus 74, 75, 76, Ichthus 74, 75, Jesus Northwest. That looks like Ichthus there. Maybe, which was
so many. So
you know
many.
who attended one of those festivals when he was either in junior high or early high school was Stephen Curtis Chapman.
He brought that up.
He told us about
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
He was in the audience.
What was the largest festival? What's the largest amount of people you performed for? I mean, you may have done crusades along the way too. So
yeah, we did crusades with Wilkerson and
really?
Nicky Cruz. And Nicky Cruz. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, we did some youth things and Dallas Home was a part of that too. Nicky Cruz, Dallas Home, the Archers. Yeah, but I would say the largest one of all those festivals, Expo 72, we weren't on the main stage, but that was 50 or 60,000 people. But one year at Mercer, Pennsylvania, they estimated between 40 and 50,000 at that. It was compared to to Woodstock.
Uh-huh.
We got rained on the first day, and the second day was a mud bowl. Yeah, that's Key 73. The picture that you're putting up now.
Yeah.
There's Nancy and Billy.
Is that LA Coliseum?
Is that the Coliseum?
Yeah, that's the LA Coliseum. And that was called Key 73 Jesus Festival.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, I'm curious because obviously at that point, Christian music was still in its infancy. And the money situation probably wasn't near what people are looking at these days. Do you mind what were you looking at as an artist? What were the revenue streams like back in that time? Because my guess is you had to take a lot of gigs on faith, probably, just hoping that they paid off. You mind sharing a little bit about what that was like?
Well, we all know what the term love offering can mean.
Yeah. Maybe you get paid, maybe you don't.
Joy and terror all at the same time. Right.
Checks in the mail.
Well,
you're working on commission like everybody else.
When the promoter starts with "well, brother," it's not going to go well.
You know what? It was if you didn't tour, even if once we signed with a record label, because the Benson Company Bob McKenzie had heard our first record that we put out on our own little label called Charisma Records that my brother Gary put together. But it got out around the country, and there weren't a lot of radio stations in 1972 playing contemporary. It wasn't even called contemporary Christian music; it was called Jesus music.
Right.
But the first person to ever be kind enough to play one of our records, our 45, on the radio, was a local DJ in that area that later on became very famous. But back then, and it was not a Christian music hour. It was a rock music hour. But my brother Tim was bold enough to go down to the studio and say, we're a local band and we have a 45 and you should play our song. And it's not, and it's like a rock song. So he's trying to convince this guy. Well, just unbeknownst to us, this guy's a wild man and he doesn't care if he gets fired by the station. And he plays our single because he's, well, you guys are a local band. I'm gonna play your song. I'll let you just hang on. I'm gonna play your song on the radio. So he played our song, Put On Jesus, Let Your Light Shine. If you go back and listen to it, it's that little rock folky thing that it's got going on. That was Captain Don Imus that played that.
Really? Wow.
That played it. on the radio there in Lancaster, California. And people will say, oh, no, you go back and look it up where he was doing his gig before later on he became who he became and what he became. But it does make sense that he was a rebel, right?
He got fired from every job he ever had, right?
That part of it makes sense, you know? So that was pretty cool to have that done. But I guess we started our first record somehow made it to Nashville. It made it on the radio in Nashville. And Bob McKenzie heard it because they kept playing it every week as a part of a battle of the bands. And we won like 2 or 3 weeks in a row with a song called Life in Jesus. And which was a combination. It was like, life in Jesus, we got life in Jesus. But then the verses were, what a friend we have in Jesus. Mm-hmm. And then married with the chorus that Billy Masters from our band had written. And so he talks to the guys at Benson and calls us up and says, we want to come to California and meet you guys and talk to you. And they liked us. They signed us to the Benson record label and told us we would love to buy this record from you and sign you to do some more records and release this record out there on I think the label at the time was Impact. Y'all might remember that label that they had there at Benson. And of course, Benson was more of a country gospel and Southern gospel record company in the 70s. And we were not that at all. And in fact, the owner of the company was just, we want to release your record, but not with that California album cover. Not the one on the beach.
Okay.
You know? And so we shot that album cover that you showed earlier, where I've got the leather hat on. And so we said, okay, hey, we're getting signed to a record label.
So which one is this one? This is Light Records. Is this the same thing, or was this before that?
This is after we did a couple of records with Benson. We didn't know if they were, I don't know, hem-hawing about whether they were gonna, because we needed a label that represented contemporary Christian music. We needed a Jesus music label. We need something so that newer artists could come in that were doing that as well. And I think that's where Bob Benson and Bob McKenzie, that's where they wanted to go. And, but it was just so much time was going by. And of course, we knew Andre. Andre was signed with wonderful Ralph Carmichael. There's another awesome human being right there who had a tremendous impact on our lives. And he loved us into that deal. And of course, with Andre's blessing, and he said, you guys you need to come over here, this West Coast label. And so we signed with Light Records that day.
Wow.
And we did our first record as the original Archers with Billy Masters and Nancy Short at that time, called Things We Deeply Feel, the purple album cover. And that had a song on it written by our cousin Donnie called It Wouldn't Be Enough. And that song took off big time. And then some people were getting married, some people were making some life decisions and left the group, and Billy was having health problems. And later on, not too many years after that, we lost Billy. But our little sister had traveled with us 2 summers at 15 and 16 years of age. And now she's 17. Nancy gets married. She decides she needs to leave the group. And Janice steps in. And so our first family recording as the Archers was the Fresh Surrender album for Light Records. And Fresh Surrender is a song that Billy wrote. Janice did her very first solo recording on that record, was a song that Nancy had written called Change. And so there was this really sweet transition from the original Archers with Billy and Nancy to now here's this family. And our sister had already been singing. I think there was one of those pictures of Janice on stage with us at one of those Jesus festivals. I think she was 16. But here she steps in at 17 years of age and makes her first recording with us. And she did a great job. And then what happened was you had a little bit of a different sound because now you had the family blend.
Sure.
With three of our vocals.
Wow.
Looks
Yeah,
like you guys are going to the prom here. I'm pretty sure, but that's we haven't even talked about the fashion, but that's a great shot.
Yeah.
That guy with the curly hair back there, that's Phil Christensen. Toured with Amy Grant and with the Promise
Yeah.
Keepers band, and he's with the Lord now. But well, just one of the greatest keyboardist guys we ever worked with live in concert.
That's a whole nother. I mean, we could spend an hour or more
Oh,
just talking about the people that have come and gone in your life in terms of in the studio and on stage and performing. I mean, just the laundry list. I mean, you guys show up at the Dove Awards and it's like a family reunion, I would imagine. That's just crazy stuff. What I was going to ask is about a little bit about the family dynamic. I'm always very fascinated. I'm a kind of a sucker for the behind the music documentaries, and I love anytime that thing you do comes on. I'm in. Scott and I are both in, and we want to watch that. The one hit wonder that goes up, and then that's such a great snapshot. But I'm so amazed at these bands that have the longevity, and especially families, the Jackson family and the Osmonds and all these guys. And you're in that same wheelhouse. So I'm just curious, just if you could talk just a little bit about the family dynamics, touring with your family, recording with your family, the family business, and just seeing other families and the havoc that wrought on their minds and on their relationships. I mean, for you guys to be still standing as a family is amazing. I got to know a little bit the Cruz family here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I just watched them and just being in this Jesus music and Christian music movement as a family. How did you guys keep it together, and what was some of that like? It had to have its ups and downs.
Oh, yeah. I love those documentaries too. When you think of how the groups like the Bee Gees or the Pointer Sisters or the Everly Brothers, or how did they make it through? And then in a way, I know because I'm in a family band. And the only thing that can keep you together is forgiveness and grace. And you're talking about some families, they're not Christians. They're just really popular, famous, incredibly rich people. And can imagine, and when you see the documentary, you see some of the things that they go through in their lives because a person tanks emotionally, or a person gets involved in drugs or alcohol or whatever, or broken relationships and all those kinds of things. And man, if they can have that forgiveness or that love that keeps them together or brings them back together or whatever the situation. I think the Everly Brothers broke up for some time, or they're brothers, but it's not easy. But we have this. It's so funny. Like, I think there was one producer that we worked with. I mean, you guys all know who Donnie McGuire is, but we were working with him on as a producer on one of our records, and he and Reba were writing some wonderful songs, and we had some of our songs, but we about drove him nuts at some point, because we have this way that we work on our vocals and creating the backgrounds and the counterparts and switching up to where I'm singing with Janice falsetto, or Tim and I are unising, or just the different things that we do to get a sound. And it can get grinding. You know what I'm saying? We're just like going, no, that kind of thing. And it's one of the things where you hear the talk back button. It says, guys, I think it's time to maybe take a break. From this for a while, you know?
It's funny. That documentary of the Bee Gees most recently, I thought I had seen and heard all of their story, but some people were talking about the uniqueness of their particular sound because they were family, because they were the DNA. I think it was Justin Timberlake that said, you realize they have an unfair advantage. They literally are one and the same. And so to try to reproduce the unity of that harmony is next to impossible. That's why nobody's really recreated the Bee Gees. And so you guys have something special that I'm sure as you did your solo careers and you're in the studio going, when it's the three of us, it just works. And so you just can't reproduce that. I just wondered if you guys experienced that.
Yeah. And Tim and I had, been around for a decade, and Janice is not completely new to this. She's toured with us a little bit, but she's new to the recording. And so you have to have a lot of grace, and it's teachable moments. And of course, we're still learning as well. But her voice, just the blend of her voice and how important that was, and then her input. And each of us have this niche that we're good at, that ideas that we come up with and things that we do. And we had a bar to reach because the people playing for our records were playing for all the pop hits. I mean, we had David Hungate from Toto. We had Lee Rittenauer playing on our records. We had Jim Keltner from the Wilburys. I mean, we had, in those early days, we had David Page. We had Steve Porcaro.
Oh my gosh.
We had musicians playing on our records that were double scale and triple scale studio musicians, because our level of band, our band guys were good players, but they had no experience in the studio.
Right.
And they were trying to get that experience. And later on, we did have some of our band guys play on our records as well, especially the live album that we did. I mean, they played that whole thing. But we had a level to rise to musically. And then our producer, especially on Fresh Surrender and Stand Up, is Larry Mahobrecht, who at one time was Elvis's musical director. And John Guess, the engineer, who was pumping out hits with all kinds of people. So it was a level that we needed to rise to really make this thing happen. And boy, did they help us. Their expertise and their encouragement and their understanding of how young and inexperienced, but how inspired we were by the moment. It's not easy being a family, let alone a family band. But I'll tell you what, the Lord sure helps make it a lot easier, because again, it has to do with grace and forgiveness and coming back and loving on each other and saying, okay. And also there were three of us, so you can have a majority rule.
Well, one word that keeps coming back in that I'm thinking about as you describe this, because you talked about it in your parents, is humility. It would seem to me that humility might have been what kept it all together as well, Steve. Is that, just regardless of how big you guys got, you still, there's a certain humility in everything that you've talked about so far that strikes me that is a thread that runs throughout your family.
I'm so glad that we had some already big people in our lives. I mean, our parents they were our parents.
Right.
And there's that element of obedience and respect and honor. When it's not that you're perfect teenagers or anything like that. There were times when our dad had some definite strong suggestions for and I'm telling you, to be able to grow our hair out over our ears, to be able to go down Hollywood and get the type of clothes that we wanted to wear in our concerts on a stage, because we felt like there's a presentation of this music that needs to be honest. And this is how we want to look, and this is how we want to arrange our songs, and this is what we want to do, because we're not trying to reach the adults and the grandparents in our church. We're trying to reach the kids that are out there in the high schools and the colleges that are listening to these other messages that are drawing them away from a potential relationship with the Lord. So that had a definite impact on us. But when you're hanging out with, you're maybe 5 years into your career and you're hanging out with Andre Crouch and Pat Boone.
Wow.
It doesn't matter how big you've been. And Pat Boone could say to you, well, it doesn't matter how famous you are. There's always somebody more famous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, your ego can get the best of you. But Andre Crouch, in all of his incredible gift and ability, and I've never felt any ego from that man, felt nothing but love and encouragement. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of artists that can say that about Andre, that were around him or were influenced by him. So I'm not the only one there. And the same thing with Pat Boone. So those kinds of situations have an influence on you to be that kind of person to someone else, and not come in with your ego and your awards and your resume and, well, we sang at the White House. Well, and people always ask, who was president?
Yeah.
Well, what does that matter?
Yeah, really, it
Okay,
doesn't
it was
matter.
harder.
Yeah.
I said the White House, but not to have that be your, your thing. No, we
Yeah,
sing for Jesus. We
that's it.
sing about Jesus.
Yeah.
None of this other stuff is going to change your heart and your life like Jesus is.
Do you think you benefited by recording on the West Coast over Nashville in terms of the music scene was more mature in LA, the studio scene was more
Yes.
mature, and it maybe matched your sound better that if because I got to believe at the time Nashville was still a country town with some gospel
Oh,
recording.
in the
And
70s. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
and it may have changed the final product significantly from what you were able to get, which was more of a pure maybe a pure rock or pop sound that you would get on the West Coast. Is that
Absolutely.
a
Absolutely.
fair? Okay.
Billy Maxwell also played on one of those earlier albums, the Fresh Surrender album. He played on a couple of those tracks, and he produced the tracks that he played on as well.
Yeah.
And then Mahobret came in as well on that.
Right.
But yeah, what it was is here we are. We're doing Jesus pop. I
Right.
mean, I would say when it comes to Jesus pop, the only other groups I could think of that could fall into the pop, not just rock or soul, but would be a pop sound would be like Larry Norman,
Mhm.
second chapter of Acts.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Where you had that kind of sound, and that wasn't Nashville back in the '70s. That was L.A.
Right. Yeah.
To get
My
that.
my thinking would be is they would have pushed you in a direction that would have taken you in a completely different, and you might have gotten pigeonholed with a whole bunch of other people that you
Yeah.
didn't necessarily want to be a part of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, my brother and I we were adamant about what we wanted to do,
Uh-huh.
whether we knew how to do it or not. And let me tell you, our Heavenly Father was so gracious to us because He gave us the desires of our heart,
Wow.
in that He gave us the people in Los Angeles who had good hearts and good spirit. I think there was only one instance in all of our recording years in LA where we had to let one guy go because he was drinking while we're trying to do the tracks. And I'm talking, this guy's an incredible, renowned drummer, and I'm not going to mention names, but he just, I don't know what he was going through at the time. And he had enough to where it affected tempo.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a producer that's bold enough to go, okay, well,
Didn't go to work today.
you just tell them we're done for today, guys,
Yeah.
and come back fresh. But everybody was just professional. And I think the thing about it too is you had musicians who were a little bit surprised that here's these Christian groups or these Christian artists, and there's some really good music here.
Yes.
Like we did a song on, well, I don't remember if it's Stand Up or Fresh Surrender. I think it's Fresh Surrender, a really up-tempo song that I wrote, a funky tune called Sanctified Life.
Okay.
And Lee Ritenour must have worked for I don't know how long until he got this guitar solo on the song. And if you want to go back and check it out, it's a song called Sanctified, listen to Lee Ritenour's guitar solo. Because we're out, this is probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. We're out in Nashville. I'm visiting my brother. He was living there. Tim was living there at the time, and he lives there now. But we go to this group of guys that Brian Mason, the well-known DJ there in Nashville, put together, and it's called all the old CCM dudes.
Okay.
You know, so you got all these guys that happen to be whenever you're in town, and they get together once a month. And Phil Keggy happened to be at one of the ones that I was at. I've been to 2 of them, and they've been happening for years now. It's wonderful, and they'll get 20, 30 guys at this thing, and all known. But anyway, so we're finishing up, and Phil Keggy walks over to us, and he goes, "Okay," he said, "guess what?" And we said, "What?" He said, "I finally mastered that Lee Ritenour solo from Sanctified Life."
Wow.
He liked it so much, he wanted to get it exactly the way Lee had played that, and he played that on our record in like 1977.
Wow. Well, and if you want to listen to any more, if you listen to any of the, like smooth jazz, you're going to listen to a lot of Lee Ritenour, and it just
Yes.
incredible, incredible.
And
That's where I was introduced to him. So just
and another guy that
amazing.
played bass for us, Leland Sklar.
Wow.
Mm,
Wonderful.
mm,
Played for everybody. He's a tremendous guy. Just people with good professional spirits and attitudes, and who were willing to work with these young dudes trying to do Christian pop.
Yeah.
They weren't condescending. They weren't kids. Maybe you better get a day job. They were very encouraging.
Wow.
mm.
Is there a point somewhere in your life where you feel like something happened that made a significant change in the direction of your life? Where there may have been something that just all of a sudden this happened, and as a result, your life is in a completely different place than it would have been on the trajectory it was on.
You mean career-wise or personal?
Either career or personal, just something that you think here would be a defining moment in my life. And maybe
Well,
people know about it, maybe they don't. What would you think would be
well,
described as a defining moment in your life, or
I
one of
I
the
think
defining moments?
I think to be invited, we were doing pretty well in the 70s, 1977, 78 with Fresh Surrender and Stand Up Records. And Christian radio had finally come along pretty well. By that time, you had KLTY and you had, I'm trying to think of all the different stations that around the country that had really strong audiences.
Yes.
And by, I would say 78 or 79, and we find out that we're getting invited to come to the White House for Gospel Music Day. And they had some Southern gospel groups. Larry Norman was there. But when it came to the kind of the pop kind of sound, they invited us. And we were very fortunate because they went alphabetically, just to be fair. So so they wanted the first group, which was the Archers, to already be on the stage. So it was fun standing behind President Carter and Rosalind, God bless her, who just
Yes. Just
passed
passed.
away. And because they were very sweet people to us. And I appreciate the fact that they were willing to have gospel music at the White House. But just right after that, we got invited to be on the Mike Douglas show, which would, if people want to equate it, it's like a daytime talk show.
Sure.
Like
It'd be like Ellen or something big, or
yeah, right.
yeah.
Mike Douglas was very known, very popular back then. Everybody wanted to be on his show. We got to be invited to be on there, and then before you know it, we get a call from our manager, and he said, "Well, you guys got nominated for a Grammy, and not only that, you're going to do a performance segment on the Grammys."
Nice.
And that's we were a part of a musical called The Lord's Prayer. And we had done a song called Give Us This Day Our Daily Bread on that record. And so because of all the artists that were involved, which was Andre Crouch, BJ Thomas, Cynthia Clausen, Walter Hawkins, Tremaine Hawkins, they invited all of us to come and do a segment of that musical on the Grammy Awards. And it won a Grammy that year.
Wow.
And so career-wise, between 79 and 80 and 81, those things had quite an impact on us, garnering a little bit more of a national name.
Right.
And it was a very heady, very exciting time in our lives. But then you do have to come back home to reality, to real life. And from a personal perspective, when we took a break after our live album in 1980, and my brother and I had been out there for over a decade, we took a break because people are getting married and people are having kids and all of this stuff. And right about the time that Chris Christian I knew Chris, done some concerts with him, but had invited me to come and as a solo artist record for Home Sweet Home Records that he had. And I didn't know how to approach that, not so much with my family, but especially with my buddy brother, my bosom buddy brother, my brother Tim. I mean,
Yes.
the kind of relationship that we have is unique to our family because we've literally spent all these hours touring, all these hours in the studio, all these, I mean, and we started out together as a duo. We didn't start out individually. We started out as a duo that developed into a band. And it was a difficult transition, but it came down to, well, I'm over here and she's over there and you're over here and you have a family to support and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, if that's what Chris wants. And I said, well, Chris is interested in the family as well, but no, we're not ready for that. So I ended up getting in the studio solo, and I had some trepidation about it too, because I didn't want people to think that our family was breaking up. It wasn't our family breaking up. It was that when you're for a full decade or more, you're either in the studio or on the road. I mean, we would go on 8-week trips in our, started out with an Econoline van and then a Dodge van and then a motorhome and then another motorhome and then a bus. And we wore them all out.
Wow.
And you had to tour. We didn't have social media. We didn't have any of that. We had to go out, and we loved that. We wanted to go out and minister. We wanted to sing in the coffee houses and in the colleges and in the high schools and in the church youth programs and the national conventions and all those kinds of things. And we saw literally thousands upon thousands of young people find Jesus as their Lord and Savior. But for me, it was a difficult time. And then right about that time, the Lord attacked my relationship. And right about up to the time that we'd done all the pre-work on my first solo album, all of a sudden I'm alone. And I'm facing losing a relationship. And granted to say, this is stuff I've never talked about before. It was at a time where if something like this happened in your life, because of it happening in other Christian artists' life and what I had seen, the enemy wants to tell you that, well, that's it, it's over. And this is to say nothing negative about my former wife, because she's a wonderful lady. She's always been an incredible mom, and we are dear friends. So I've just prefaced that to say that. But, and I won't go any further down the road because there are people that know more than that. But the way this thing happened was just so difficult. And I was ready to just say, okay, well, that's it. I got to find a job, or I got to go back to school. And somehow, I think through my relationship with Chris Christian and his sensitivity, his incredible talent, his ear for music, his ear for songs, good songs, and his belief in my ability. And I was missing, you're missing your family. You're missing singing with your brother and singing with your sister. And now you're doing all your own vocals. And I wanted to keep it that way. I didn't want to bring in other background singers and stuff. I was like, well, I'll just double or harmonize with myself or so on and so forth. But it encouraged me to the point that in the midst of all this, I literally walked in the studio and started recording my first album, which was called Solo. It was just Steve Archer solo. And I remember one particular session where I started to lose it, singing this one particular song written by Gary McSpadden. God bless him, Bill Gaither Trio. And when I first heard the song, I was like, oh my goodness, I love this song. But it was a song that said, but you didn't walk away. You didn't have to say, I love you, but you love me just the same. And that's how I was got my composure back eventually. And that was my favorite song on the record. I know a lot of other people's, and it's one of my son's favorite songs too, and he can sing it. Another song was called Living in the Hands of the Man I Know Called Jesus.
Wow.
And I just recently spoke to Andy Chrisman from For Him, and he was talking about how he loved those songs and how much they ministered to him, the younger generation. We're talking about the guys that came along 20 years later. But in the midst of your storm or in the midst of your difficulty, that doesn't mean you have to stop being who God called you to be.
Right.
And you don't have to become overwhelmed, although I was. You don't have to become bitter, had to fight that really hard. Don't have to get back at someone, but lay it at the feet of Jesus and let him work it all out. Let him handle it. And if you have to move on with your life, you're still moving on with your family. You're still moving on with your Savior, with your Creator. You're still moving on with the Holy Spirit. And that was the story for a lot of Christian artists through the years. And when there's another side of not Christian, but religious attitudes out there that you have to face, that, well, what are you doing in Christian music?
Yeah.
You know? And you think to yourself, well, what am I going to do? I got to go sing pop now and be in clubs and do that whole thing and be popular and make money. That's not my heart.
Right.
The thing I love to do the most, other than be with my grandkids and my kids.
Yeah.
It used to be my kids, but my grandkids,
Yeah.
they understand that.
Yeah.
I just absolutely love. I have 7 granddaughters and 3 grandsons, and I love any moment that I ever have with them.
Yeah.
But
Do
I
you
mean,
think do you think that Christian music can be a little judgmental? Because I mean, we hear about pop stars that go through these personal difficulties, and our assumption is you're in ministry, or you're in these roles, and people seem to be very upset. They don't realize that you're human as well, and you're going to have your moments of difficulty and your challenging points in life.
yeah.
Did you feel that going through it? Did you have some pushback in the industry? And how did you maybe overcome what that was like?
Well, I'll tell you, it had me looking back in the Word of God and going, okay, was everybody just perfect here?
No.
Did everybody in the Old Testament or even the New Testament, did they just get it right, or did they have difficulty? Did they have struggle? Did they have despair and anger and frustration? And well, hello.
Yeah. The Old Testament is filled with broken people doing
Oh
things
my
for
goodness.
God, isn't it?
And it's because of that that it's filled with redemption.
Yes.
It's because of that that it's filled with, so that is the church.
Yes.
There's only one broken body that was perfect.
Yeah.
Only one.
Yeah.
And that's Jesus.
Yeah.
When we're broken, I mean, it's not so much because we're not perfect, it's because we're fallen. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So we're going to fail. It put me personally, in some ways, in a bit of a tailspin, while at the same time finishing my first solo record and then going on tour or doing concerts and things like that, and fighting through what you're facing in your personal life. And when you read the stories, the books about Hollywood, and you see story after story of how their lives were so tragic, and yet somehow they made it through. Sometimes it's because they did find a savior, but other times, what is it? It's just this love and this passion for what they do, and they finally said, I've got to get it together. I've got to stop doing this. I've got to stop doing that. I've got to stop believing this. I've got to get better. But my goodness, we have the Word of God. We don't just have self-help. We have a Redeemer and a Savior that can, and I'll never be perfect until I see him face to face. But I will keep fighting the fight, and he'll keep loving me and supporting me and forgiving me and inspiring me. And also, oh my goodness, my children and my grandchildren, they still love me. They still believe in me. They still love going back and listening to stuff. And having said all of that, he's faithful. There's so many songs that have described it, and I've sung songs that have described it, and I can't wait to get in another situation where I'm singing a song. And one of them that comes to mind right now that I didn't record and I didn't sing, but I've got to sing it in worship, and that was, I just want to speak the name of Jesus. You guys know that song?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Over every heart and every mind. 'Cause I know there is peace within his presence. I speak Jesus. That's it.
Wow.
And we're about to do that segue.
Oh,
New
thank you
live album.
so
New
much
live
for
album coming out.
just being real and being vulnerable. That means so much. I think the right thing to do is just to start. I tell you what, I will say this. This is where I come into the story. This is where I got to know Steve a little bit, and I would have liked to have known better. But knowing more now what he was going through during that time period means even more to me now, because the 82 album solo, the Through His Eyes and the Action, those were getting airplay. And
Yes.
from a certain perspective, Steve Archer was the 30-year one hit wonder. He was hitting the airwaves to a whole new group, a whole new generation of people that just thought he was Eric Champion or some guy that was coming along. No shade on Eric, I apologize. But I mean, you know what I'm talking about, Steve? I mean, in other words, it was the new guy, the new solo career who had decades of experience and an amazing family and a legacy. But these songs were hitting the charts. And knowing that you were going through all the other stuff you were going through just means so much more to me now. And that those songs, those amazing songs that went to the top of the charts for weeks and months, had to have been a different experience. And then being on Home Sweet Home Records and that whole thing, and talk just a little bit about that kind of golden era of contemporary Christian music, and when everything went pop and we all went commercial and rode that wave. What was that like for Steve Archer?
It was fun. And even missing my family, it was wonderful because everywhere I went, there were two different audiences. There was the older audience that was aware of the Archers, and then there was the younger audience come around after I'd done my first two solo albums that were aware of my records. And because of Through His Eyes, because of the song Safe with Marilyn McCoo, that's another whole story in itself, just how God brought that together, and what absolutely wonderful people Billy Davis Jr. and Marilyn McCoo are, and who love God and are touching a lot of people's lives. But for her to say yes, the way she said yes to solo artists who really, I don't have huge pop hits and stuff like that. I mean, she's from the fifth dimension, and I grew up on some of that. And then credit to Debbie Boone as well, who did a duet with me on my first solo album. But it was, so wherever I went, I had people saying, well, where's Tim and Janice? How are they doing? I was able to talk about my family. And then there were kids that were like, I would share about the Archers in my concerts, in my solo concerts. And people would, after the concert, they say, so you're a part of a band or something like that? And I'm going, yeah, the Archers, look it up.
It's like Paul McCartney and the Wings.
Yeah.
And the kids are going,
right. Yeah.
Was he in another band before Wings?
Yeah, I mean, 20 years later, I think Andy mentioned that. He was more aware of what I was doing solo, not so much the Archers thing. And so, because we were 70s and early 80s, and then I started in 82 through the 90s. And the Archers did do another record in 85, and we did one in 92 as well, which you showed that picture from The Colors of Your Love. My family's my family, so I was always able to see my family, and they became so encouraging, and they loved what I was recording, and they even came in on saying, Tim and Janice came and sang with me on the song that I did, If You Were the Only One, which was an airplay song. So it was just a time of renewal and seeing what the Lord was doing with contemporary Christian music from a crossover standpoint as well, because you had Amy and Michael W. Smith and other people who were taking the songs to the pop audience as well. And that kind of opened up a whole new world. The song Safe with Marilyn and I actually got a lot of secular radio airplay, which I was happy about because of the message of the song, that we're safe inside his love, we're anchored in his arms. And so it was great to see that happen.
Was there a pull on you personally, from your ego, from maybe what you were going through personally, to go down a path that, okay, this is my chance. I'm not getting any younger. This is my time to shine. Did you have temptations that you might not have had otherwise to really stroke your ego down those years?
Listen, you always struggle with ego. You can't be about to walk on the Grammy Awards and a guy whisper in your ear, knock 'em dead, there's 80 million people watching. Yeah. Or even, you think about going into a concert of 500 or 1,000 people and you finish a song and everybody loves it. And afterwards they're buying your records and stuff. You can buy into all that. But how famous you are or whatever. But like I said, there's always someone more famous. But I think what you said something about, I always come back to my family because my favorite thing to do is record with my family. And this past couple of years that we've been finishing up the finishing touches on the project that's coming out next year. In fact, in January, we'll be in the studio doing the final mixes. But singing with Tim and Janice so much again over this period of time actually makes me go back. And to be honest with you, I wish it was 7 more group records. And it may sound bad that it was out of necessity that I did solo records, because you're into a career and that's how you support your family. But I like to come back to the fact it's because I love to sing, and there were songs and I wanted to record these songs, and I was going to do it whether it was me or with my family. And so I don't struggle with an ego in a sense of, I don't need my family now. I'm good. I got a solo career and I'm all that and a bag of chips. Not at all. I mean, I always miss them. I always miss singing with my brother. I look back and I think, well, we've recorded a couple of 100 or 300 songs together. I wish it was 1,000.
Wow. Steve, as we start to close this out, the thing that we always like to focus on is legacy. We're beginning to approach that point in our life. We have to say, we see the finish line coming, and we know there's going to be a day that we're not around, and all we're going to be is a memory in people's minds. That's the impact we're going to have.
Right.
Curious, what would you like to have people think about when they're thinking about the legacy of Steve Archer? What would you like the end of the story to be when your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are talking about Steve Archer?
Well, for my children and grandchildren, it comes down to that this is somebody that they love. And that if there's anything that I've done, especially in music, I have 2 grandchildren right now that are just flourishing in music. My granddaughter Caitlin and my grandson Jensen. And Caitlin's in her 2nd year at OU and studying music. And it's great to see. And of course, they have the Cruz side of the family too, influencing and inspiring that as well. So it's wonderful to see that inspiration. Plus, they're leading worship. And I have a son who's a pastor, and his wife is a wonderful worship leader. I have my daughter Vanessa and her husband who've been in ministry for many years, and they lead worship as well. That's the legacy. I am my father's legacy. I'm not a preacher or a pastor. I'm a singer of songs. I remember when I was a little kid, I did not want to be a preacher or a missionary.
That's okay. My dad was a pharmacist and my grandfather was a pharmacist, and the last thing I was ever going to be was a pharmacist. Okay. Sometimes that's the way our life goes.
Right. But still, there's that legacy of ministry.
Yes.
So that's the most wonderful thing that can happen, is that legacy of ministry, because that means that people are going to continue to hear the most important message in the world that there is. And that is that Jesus is the answer.
Yeah.
No matter what, Jesus is the answer. And our legacy musically is to be gone, to be with the Lord. My parents and my brother Gary, who's passed on, who was so much a part of helping us in our early days, to just know that 20 years from now, somebody is going to hear my voice or hear our family's voices singing a particular song, and it's going to touch them, it's going to inspire them. I love getting on social media, and every now and then you get the testimonial from someone, and they say, I was at your concert or this Jesus festival, and I heard you do this and sing this, and I gave my heart to Jesus.
Wow.
And I now have a family, and or I'm now a music minister, or I'm now a pastor. The stories that we've heard, that's the legacy here in the family and the legacy out there. And trust me, it has everything to do with God's mercy, God's grace, God's forgiveness. It has everything to do with Him, because without all of that,
Yeah.
I would have gone further down that spiral, because the spiral was pretty bad for a period of time. And it could have cost me everything.
Yeah.
He's faithful.
Absolutely.
I've got a question as it relates to legacy. If we had the ability to wave a magic wand and take you back to 18 or 20-year-old Steve, what would you tell yourself that now that you didn't know then?
Oh man, what would I tell myself? Don't get married so young.
That's a good mic drop right there.
Oh man, I would tell myself to spend more time with the Lord. This world is so distracting and so busy, and I'm so guilty of it, that we get caught up in so much. And as much time, I'm reading the Bible through again this year, and I love doing that. And I get to talk to my son about this, and him being a pastor, he really ministers to me. And it's that challenge of spending more time, because see, on this planet, we want to spend time with people we love and people who love us. But because God is not physically here, we can't see him, or Jesus is not. We can see Jesus in the scriptures and in the pictures and movies and things like that. But because he's not physically here, we're not drawn to spend more time. I think we have to develop a greater, deeper love towards him, to where we want to spend more time with him, even though we can't touch him and see him physically. And I need that.
Steve, I got one last question for you. I want to pull up this photo here, and just seeing you guys continue to sing, and I don't know what the future holds. I know you're in the studio, and that's exciting. We haven't really talked about that. Maybe we'll come back around and talk about that, or when the recording comes out, we can do another recording. But I want to give you an opportunity as we wrap this time we have together today up, and as we just came out of Thanksgiving and we're heading into Christmas. What would you say to those two people in that picture that means so much to you, with all the time y'all spent together and all the songs you've sung and written and places you've gone? What would you tell them, and what do you want to leave behind to your incredible brother and your sweet sister?
We used to always say on stage, this is our sister Janice. She's the rose among the thorns. And that is one of the prettiest, sweetest lady you will ever meet. And she loves passionately. And she's recently become a grandma a few times over, and it's fun watching her, because I've been a grandpa for 20 years. But it's just been fun watching her experience that. But just her love and her passion and her belief and her faithfulness, and that sweet harmony and sweet voice that she has. To my brother Tim, I mean, how did God know to just put us together in that bathroom, fighting over the mirror at 15 and 13, and singing whatever song we were duetting on, to the point of where our dad said, I want you guys to get up and do a special. You know how they call it, a special. Do a special. And I look back on that, and that doing a special in church 50 years later, and this project, just real quickly, I look at that picture, and that picture was like almost 5 years ago when we did this live concert, right before COVID, right before My brother had a major shoulder injury, which involved surgery. And so, right before cancer struck, my sister-in-law, my brother had already experienced oral cancer and had come through that. In fact, if you want to hear our rendition of He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, that's out there somewhere in the airwaves, a song that we did just during that time when he was going through that cancer. He's cancer free. His wife is cancer free. And just the time it's taking us with everybody living in different places and booking studio to be able to do this labor of love up to the point of January of next year. We haven't gotten to do that a lot over the past decade and a half. And I am just loving every minute of it with my bro. And we can do it while in the midst of these tremendous struggles that he's been through. I admire him and love him dearly.
Scott,
my time's been blessed.
I tried to prepare you a little bit for Steve, but this has gone way past my expectations, and I know yours as well. Steve, you're a class act.
Y'all are awesome. You guys are awesome. Well, your questions are amazing, but just I appreciate what you're doing. And there can never be enough of y'all, because just like the guys who play the records, the guys that used to play our performances on Christian television, it's not about just getting our name out there, but it's being willing to make that space for people to share their testimony. And so I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you touched on it. I think there were so many different people that played a role in all of this. Obviously, it's the artist, it's those people, it's the music, it's the message. There are so many different people that play different roles, and we're hoping the Lord will continue to bring those people, those radio personalities, those A&R guys, on the producers, the studio. I mean, there's just so many stories. There's just so many stories, and I think we would all be remiss if we let that time pass and we didn't document that, to tell the next generation, to say, you can stand on these shoulders. You can overcome what's going to happen. You can write better music. And I think what you said, when you had to boil it down, it was to just spend more time with the master,
right?
and let him pour into you.
Yeah. I mean, he knows you, and he gave you your gift. He knows your gift better than you do. Mm-hmm. And he can help you perfect that. I'm excited because for Chris Christian, who I mentioned earlier, worked with as a producer, who had taken a lot of time away from the music scene, but just recently I was able to go out and be a part of a documentary that he's doing. And so I'm excited to see what comes down the pike there, because Chris has worked with a lot of people through the years. So that's somewhere down the road as well. But right now, I cannot wait for January 10th to be in Nashville and wrap up this project. And if I never get to do another one, I'm happy. But whatever the Lord has for us going forward, we're still here.
Yep.
And we're still available. Let's just be available for the world needs Jesus.
Yeah.
Amen.
We should be on the lookout for an album in January. Is that right, Steve? There'll be something new coming out?
We're finishing up in January. It should be definitely sometime in the spring. And I know my brother Tim and his wife Cynthia don't want you to quote me on that.
Okay.
Because but by come January 13th, we're done.
Okay.
We're finished, and we're ready for that baby to go out there.
Yeah. Will you be touring at all after that, or is that still up in the air right now?
Our hearts are, Tim and Janice and I, our hearts are pretty much whatever the Lord has for us. If he gives us an opportunity, because these are wonderful songs. These are songs that have touched a lot of people's lives, and the anointing never goes away. You know how it is when you hear an anointed song and you just go, our God is an awesome God, he reigns. Just that there's something that touches you. There's so many others, but so if the doors are open, then we'll do that. It's in my phone, just like my phone's telling me I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay. Well,
So that kind of
Steve,
answers it right
oh,
there.
yeah. That's perfect time to end, Steve. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. My
Amen.
honor, and thank you for thinking of this old Jesus music.
You bet.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Absolutely. Let's stay in touch, and you guys go
Yeah.
check out Steve Archer stuff online, man.
Thank
Love you,
Matt
brother.
Heibarger.
Yeah.
My brother,
There you
my
go.
singing brother and partner, Matt Heibarger, who
Matt
mentioned
the
y'all
man.
to me. Love you, Matt.
Thank you.
Good guy. He's a good guy. All right, you guys take
Yeah.
care. God bless everyone.
God bless you.